We're doing an epoxy floor in my new workshop in this episode of CityBilly Adventures. Stay tuned. My wife and I grew up in the suburbs of Northeast Ohio, and we started our family there too. Then a few years ago, we stumbled into this dilapidated estate property that just had way too much potential to pass up. Follow along as we DIY our way through creating our dream estate, one project at a time. A wise man once said, "You're from the city, but you like hillbilly things." You're a CityBilly. So we're back for part 2 of our new workshop series. Part 1 was 3 years in the making, and you can check it out right here. Now that the building itself has been completely updated, we can empty everything out so we can freshen up the floor. And after a lot of research, we decided to go with this 1-part epoxy coating from Behr. Now, I chose this product for a variety of reasons, but mainly because our friends at Behr reached out and offered to sponsor this video.
No, they didn't.
No, they didn't.
Yeah, the only sponsor we have here at CityBilly Adventures are our friends at Behr Tools, and they're not even a real company. But at least this way, you can count on a real, honest review. So anyway, back to why I chose this product. First of all, there's a couple different tiers of how we could finish the floor, starting with not finishing it at all. And there's an argument to be made for this. I mean, after all, it's just a shop. The floor is in decent shape, and I'm just gonna spill stuff and drag stuff across the floor. So leaving it the way it was an option that got careful consideration. But I felt like the finishing touch to phase 1 of my workshop transformation had to include redoing the floor. I couldn't have this brand new ceiling, these sturdy OSB walls, and this nasty floor. So the next option was to just paint the floor using a concrete paint. That was by far the easiest and cheapest option, but also the least durable. So if I was going to go through all the effort of painting the floor, I figured some sort of epoxy coating was the way to go. Epoxy is basically just a special paint made for garage floors that's a lot more durable. This 1-part epoxy seemed to be the easiest epoxy option. And there's also 2-part epoxy that comes in a kit and seems pretty user-friendly. Generally, 2-part epoxy is a lot more durable than 1-part, but it's also more expensive. And then, of course, you could always hire a professional to do your epoxy floor, but that's way more expensive, and it goes against pretty much everything we believe in here at CityBilly Adventures. So the big decision for us came down to either 1-part or 2-part epoxy. Our outbuilding is 20 by 30, which is...
That's
600 square feet. The 2-part epoxy kits will cover up to 500 square feet, and that includes the concrete etch, the 2-part epoxy coating, and the color chips. So I'd have to buy 2 kits to make up for that extra 100 square feet, and I'd have a bunch of extra material that would go to waste. Plus, I plan to go a little heavy with the color chips, so I'd have to buy more of those. So the numbers just didn't seem right for me to do the 2-part epoxy for my situation. Now, on the other hand, the 1-part epoxy comes in either 1-gallon or 5-gallon buckets, and you can buy the exact amount that you need for your space. Same with the etch and the color chips. Plus, this is a workshop, not a garage. I'm not going to be driving vehicles with hot tires on this floor, so the added durability of the 2-part epoxy just didn't seem necessary. So to cover our 600 square foot floor, we ended up buying 3 gallons of Behr 1-part epoxy, 2 gallons of concrete etch, 1 concrete crack repair kit, 2 gallons of concrete primer, 2 packs of color chips, and 1 gallon of matte finish top coat to really seal in that epoxy flavor. And if you're wondering how we ended up with these Behr and Rust-Oleum products, I did a lot of research, read a bunch of reviews, and compared prices. Actually, all we have by us is Home Depot, and that's what Home Depot sells. But they're name brands, I'm sure it's fine. Anyway, before we could start the floor, we had to clear out all this crap so that we could wash the floor and prep it for paint. All right, let's go. It was a long day for all of us. I swept up 5 years worth of dirt and sawdust. Then I used a floor scraper and a garden hose to get as much loose debris off the floor as possible. Now we're super lucky that this outbuilding already had electric, water, and gas. But the one thing that it doesn't have is a drain. So every time I rinsed the floor, I had to use a floor squeegee and push all the water out the door. Then I used this heavy-duty degreaser to remove as much of the old oil spots as possible. You mix 1 gallon of this stuff with 1 gallon of water, and you work it around the floor with a scrub brush. We used a total of 2 containers of degreaser. Then more rinsing, and more squeegeeing, if that's a word. And lots of sweating. Of course we decided to start this project when it was like 200% humidity all week. The next day, I continued to prep the floor by applying this concrete etch. It's basically an acid wash that roughs up the surface of the concrete so the epoxy sticks a little better. The application was pretty much the same as the degreaser. 1 gallon of etch plus 1 gallon of water, scrub into the concrete, rinse, and squeegee. The floor is supposed to feel like 150 grit sandpaper when the etching is done. The instructions say you're supposed to work in 10 foot by 10 foot squares. I scrubbed each section in 2 directions, letting the acid work for about 5 minutes before I rinsed it off. Then I used this surface cleaner attachment to power wash the floor one more time. It's important to make sure there's no contaminants on the concrete when you apply the epoxy. We ran fans and a dehumidifier until the room was bone dry, and with the humidity, that took 2 days. But no rest for the weary. There's always something at the CityBilly Ranch to keep us busy. You really have to love this kind of work to live here, and honestly, we love it. Once the floor was completely dry, I could fill in this giant crack down the middle of the room. I used this epoxy filler and a scraper to apply it, and it took 24 hours to cure. Then I used a shop vac to suck up any concrete dust or other debris that was left on the floor. Now I can't hardly function without loud music playing, but pay extra attention if you've got headphones on that you don't inadvertently pull the plug out of the wall. It's a giant waste of time dragging that vacuum around if it's not on. Usually the vacuum not sucking anything up is a clue that something's wrong. Then I look like a complete idiot in front of all 8 of you that watch this video. Like this happens to me more than I care to admit.
So the prep work was almost done. The last thing left to do before I could apply the epoxy was to put down 2 coats of bonding primer. This helps the epoxy to stick to the concrete. It goes on a milky white color but dries clear. And it's basically the consistency of milk too, so I found it easier to just pour it out on the floor instead of trying to use a paint tray. You're supposed to be able to apply the second coat after 4 to 6 hours, but again, with the humidity, we had to wait until the following day.
So just like every other project around here, this took way longer than I initially expected, but it was finally time to transform this floor.
We started by cutting in the edges. Then I applied the first coat of epoxy, and man, what an immediate visual payoff. All the days of prep was so much work with not much of a visual difference, but finally covering up that ugly old floor was so satisfying. As usual, our schedules got a little busy, and we didn't put down the second coat for a couple days. The second coat is when you apply the paint chips, and that transforms the look of the floor even more. You roll a small section of paint, then sprinkle down the chips so they stick to the wet paint. Having a partner makes this job a lot easier. One tip that we learned along the way is there's definitely a technique to spreading the chips. Mrs. CityBilly started spreading the chips like she was sprinkling seasoning on a roast. It worked okay, but the chips had a tendency to clump together a little. As we went, she learned that if you toss the chips up in the air, they have a lot more time to spread out, and it made a more uniform pattern on the floor. And the last step in this project was to add 1 coat of matte finish top coat. We let the epoxy cure for a couple days before adding the finish. This step isn't completely necessary, but I wanted to put it on over the chips to really lock them in place. And just like the primer, the top coat goes on milky but dries clear.
So finally, my shop is a fresh, blank canvas. It's been a long time coming, and I'm super excited to start creating my dream workshop. And now the hard part is figuring out which project to do first. I'm gonna go figure that out, and we'll see you back here real soon with lots more shop projects. Thanks for watching. We're putting in an epoxy floor. Leaving it the way it was an option that got careful.
Don't hurt yourself now. Can't do it. Can't do it.
Go. Oh, hold on. Okay, stop. Oh. Go. Oh, hold on. 1, 2, 3.
But I felt like the finishing touch to phase 1 of my shop. Blech. Epoxy is just a paint that's a little more, epoxy is basically just a paint. Generally, 2-part epoxy is...
I think we decided to do 2 coats, but I really think the water.
It said you're supposed to do 2 coats.
about building.
I did it!
And if you're wondering,
Congratulations.